Hey guys, and welcome back to Monka, where occasionally stupid shit ensues, but maybe not the case today, but I don't know, whatever. But today, I have beat another game. I beat it on Tuesday, and I wanted to talk a bit about it, because, it's just something I do now, because I like to get my thoughts about whatever game I'm playing at the time out. So, on Tuesday, I beat Crystar, that is this game. Specifically, I played the Nintendo Switch version. This one came out in March 2022. I understand the original release of Crystar came out in sometime in 2019. This one came out in March of 2022. Bought it around the time that it came out because I believe I beat like Tales of Vesperia maybe a couple weeks around that time. And so pretty much when I beat Tales of Vesperia, I just bounced right into this game. But got some opinions about it because, I just do, how it is. So long and the short, a few things about it. It is NIS published, FurYu developed. NIS is kind of so-so. Sometimes they publish good budget RPGs, sometimes they don't. In this case, this is a good JRPG, action RPG in particular, but unfortunately, per the usual of NIS, they kind of have budget RPGs and they kind of suffer due to that budget. If anything, this seems apparent because the developer is FurYu, and FurYu is good. I will say this much, I know people kind of hate on the original Caligula effect, which I liked, which I played back in like November 2021 if I'm recalling correctly. I liked that game a lot, but it was hurt by the fact of its budget. And this game is a lot similar. It could be a great game if it just had more of a budget, but as it stands, it's just a good game, but it showed a lot of potential that if FurYu was really given like more of a budget, they could really kind of kick ass, kind of like Gust in the JRPG department. But starting off, it took me about 42 hours to beat. Little under what you would get for a normal RPG. I'd normally put an RPG probably in the range of like 60 hours for like the long haul ones. 40 is a bit on the shorter side, but maybe that's the average, who knows. And I've played some that have been 20 hours, I've played some that have been 80 hours, so I would say 40 is kind of right in the middle, more to what I've been playing recently on the lower side. But long and the short of my opinion is, would I recommend it? Well, if you're looking for a game with some good characters and story, I would absolutely recommend it. But I have to say this, if you are adverse to repetitious gameplay, you would not like this game. I liked it a lot, I do not regret playing it, and I am not like adverse to repetition, I'm fine with that. But if you are, you might not enjoy this game as much as I did. Now, starting off with the boring shit that I consider not that important is the graphics. The graphics are serviceable for what they are. Nothing amazing, especially on the Switch, but they're fine. There's no real like facial animations for characters. It's mostly done in the anime portraits that you're probably familiar with from other RPGs. That's pretty much what this game does, is the portraits rather than actual animated faces. I do like animated faces, but it's whatever. It's what the developer does, really. It's not something I riff on. The game has an anime aesthetic to it, so that's what you can expect. If you like that, you like that. If you don't, you probably don't play JRPG, so it doesn't matter. But overall, graphics are serviceable for what they are, per usual. As I've done like I don't know how many of these, I really don't care about the graphics, so I'm not really going to comment on it. In terms of the sound design, being like voice acting and music, the music can be good at times, and it's a bit disappointing because the first dungeon showed a lot of potential for some like really good music, and there is some really good music in this game, but at some points you have like, oh, this is some good music, and at some points you have budget JRPG soundtrack, and you know what I mean if you know what I mean. It just sounds like a budget JRPG soundtrack, but sometimes it has moments where it really shines, other times it's just budget JRPG forgetfulness. Unfortunately, that's kind of where the soundtrack sits. I've been kind of disappointed by soundtracks recently, besides like Blue Reflection all the way back in like November. But besides that, I've been pretty disappointed by soundtracks. This one, it's just middling, honestly. I wouldn't say it's good, wouldn't say it's bad. It has moments but for the most part, it just kind of has that budget JRPG sound, and honestly, that's just about as far as it goes. In terms of voice acting, this game actually has two options. It has Japanese and English voice acting. Kind of surprising for a budget RPG that they actually funded an English dub. I didn't use it because it kind of sounded like trash from what I heard of it. I didn't have the option to change it up front, so I didn't. I had to wait at least half an hour, so I had to hear the voice acting, the English voice acting, for at least half an hour. Did not like it that much. Wasn't that good from what I heard. So as soon as I got the option, I switched it to Japanese voice acting, and the Japanese voice acting is a lot better than the English voice acting, I'll say that much. But I don't understand Japanese, but I can at least understand emotions, and the Japanese voice acting has a decent amount of emotion packed into it, so I enjoyed the Japanese voice acting. It was good. I can't complain about it because, you know, it sounded good, and the voice actors really did their part. The English voice acting just falls flat. If you buy this game, you have to put up with the English voice acting for at least a half hour in the first half. After that, you can switch over to Japanese, listen to the rest in Japanese. Personally, I would pick that because the Japanese voice actors have emotion, they sound like driven, and they sound like, you know, they're hard-hitting. So overall, in terms of sound design, music is middling. It has its moments, but it's just middling, honestly, not that good. I wouldn't say not that good, but I would just say in the middle between not bad, not good. And in terms of the voice acting, I would go with the Japanese voice acting. Japanese voice acting does a good job in my opinion. Now in terms of the gameplay, this will be something kind of where people will diverge on opinion, I believe, because it really comes down to how much you can put up with repetition. I would say a majority of JRPG players is just very assuming. Mind you, I actually don't know. I'm assuming a majority of JRPG players can put up with kind of repetition just due to the fact that that's kind of what the genre is. There's a lot of repetition in JRPGs with like grinding and shit and like fighting the same enemies over and over. That's just kind of what JRPGs is, but this takes it, kind of makes it more repetitious than that due to the fact that it's an action RPG. So you're kind of just spamming the same moves over and over, and that's kind of what the gameplay is when you're dungeon crawling. You really only go between two sections of like a semi-visual novel, which is whatever, you know, visual novel aspects. I would say it's about a 25-75 if I had to put a number on it. Had to put a guess, maybe closer to maybe like 40, 60, 30, 70, somewhere in that range of like visual novel to gameplay. There definitely is more gameplay than there is visual novel aspects. And the visual novel aspects are fine just because they don't linger too much, and that's like why I'm fine with it. For games that have like lingering visual novel aspects, I really hate it. This game does not, so I was fine with that. And those visual novel aspects really help to build the story, so I was fine with them. There is no open world, hub world type of thing. You pretty much launch from a like launch menu of going to different chapters in the story. You just launch directly into the dungeon, play out the dungeon, finish the dungeon, and you move on to whatever is next. In terms of dungeons are kind of repetitive, as meaning there is really no variation until you change chapters. Otherwise, they kind of follow a linear setup with linear like venues and appearances and linear enemies as well. Like you get the same enemies for pretty much throughout a chapter. Until you move on to another chapter, you'll move on to different variations of those same enemies. Like I said, this game has a lot of repetition, and that really all borders on whether you can put up with a lot of repetition or not. If you can, this game can actually be quite a bit of fun when you start getting good at the combat, because you can start kind of dodging and like finessing around enemies and like kiting them and really getting kind of like artful with the combat and kind of like graceful with the combat. You can kind of just flick around and dodge and slash enemies with some real finesse while dodging attacks all at the same time, and it feels really good. Now mind you, being an action RPG, the combat feels the same struggles as pretty much everything else with the budget. This is not butter smooth combat where you're just swinging and dodging and everything just feels crisp as fuck and smooth as fuck. There is some jank to it due to the fact that it's a budget RPG. You'll feel some of that jank when you're playing. Like one of the most notable things was like you couldn't really cancel attacks, which kind of annoyed me when I was trying to do the dodges and shit, and I was about to get attacked and I was trying to cancel attack and I couldn't. Things like locking onto enemies have a weird thing where you can kind of scroll through what enemy you're targeting, but it doesn't work exactly how you'd expect it to, and I'll target. You have to flick a few times to target the enemy you want to, and by that time you might get attacked by another enemy. The combat really and the gameplay suffers from the budget RPG that this game has all throughout it. That feel that you feel just really, it lingers throughout the entire game. If you have expectations of like, oh, I need to play the creme de la creme, you won't like this game, but because it really feels like it's on a budget. That bleeds into the combat as well, unfortunately, but if you can put up with that, you can get some really satisfying combat when you get down to it and get really good at it, because you can just be dodging around, slashing enemies, casting attacks and spells and just going nuts, and it feels really good when you get down to it. But overall, in terms of gameplay, I thought it was pretty enjoyable, and honestly I was able to bear with it because I enjoyed it enough to where it wasn't bad. Now, I wouldn't say this is the best gameplay I've ever played in my entire life, but I found it perfectly fine, even compared to the fact that I've played decent action RPGs in recent memory. But honestly, this one is fine as well. It just suffers from a budget. If you can put up with that, you can have some really satisfying combat in this game, but otherwise, if you can't put up with like budget RPG shit, then honestly you might not enjoy the combat as much. If you can, like I said, it can have some satisfying moments. Just know that it is repetitive to more of a fault than most RPGs are, unfortunately. With that said, like I said, I can put up with repetitiveness pretty much all day, so I was absolutely fine with the gameplay. In terms of characters and story, I would say that this is where the game is really strong, and this is where I've seen FurYu really shine as well. The story and characters really don't suffer from the budget. They feel really well written, well rounded, and you'll really end up enjoying all of the characters very much, and the story as well. I don't want to spoil the story too much because it's kind of like right off the riff you can spoil some big shit, but pretty much what you need to know is that a girl named Ray pretty much went to a place called Purgatory, which is kind of like the actual purgatory like reference in the Bible, I guess, or kind of like any I guess biblical or religious purgatory, where it's kind of the middling ground between life and death, and she has to save her sister from the fate of pretty much being wiped out in purgatory. That's kind of how the story starts, but it develops into a lot more because due to the way this game was designed, for whatever reason, you have to play through the last 3 chapters 3 times to get the true ending. This game has 8 chapters in total. You play through chapters 1 through 8. Normally you get an ending, not a very satisfying ending. You play through chapters 6 through 8 a second time, you get a second ending. You play through chapters 6 through 8 a third time, get a third ending, and you play through a final chapter and you get the true ending. It's a weird way to design a game. I don't really mind it, and it should be noted that every time you play through the chapters 6 and 8, it changes every time, so it's not repetitive as it could be. Unfortunately though, the levels pretty much stay exactly the same, so like I was saying with the repetitiveness, if you don't like repetitiveness, you're not gonna really like this game. That being said, I was fine with that. I find it a bit weird to kind of design your story like that. It's a bit strange. They do explain it in the ending of the game kind of, and throughout the game why they do that type of story, so it kind of makes sense in relation to the story. It is a very weird way to design your story though, I won't lie. That being said, it was fine to me. I was able to kind of muscle through that 3 times. It's a bit of a weird design due to the fact that you can't get a true ending on your first play. You can technically get a true ending on your first playthrough, but your first playthrough is just blazing through those 3 endings and then getting the true ending. But I would heavily recommend playing through the entire game and getting the true ending, because the first ending is not satisfying. You won't be satisfied with it, and truly the game is meant to be played through all the way to the end because you get that good ending. Technically that should be the only ending you should get, really. It's just kind of weird how they set it up to be like you have to play it several times to get the true ending. I was fine with it though, but like I said, it plays really heavily into that repetition. The characters you meet along the way are all really enjoyable and have really nice personalities that really are built throughout the entire game that you will come to enjoy. Honestly, I liked all the characters. The cast stays to a small cast of 4, like 4 main characters. That really helps the game because they really tightly build on these 4 characters alone. Building on these 4 characters alone lends its hand to having only 4 characters to really develop, but they develop them really well. They have really good personalities, and you really come to like every character that you meet throughout the game, and you really become attached, kind of like other games. You kind of become attached, and like, you know, you feel some type of way when something bad happens. You're like, oh damn. I really like how they approach developing the characters, just because it works really well and all the characters are really solid. That being said, only a couple of closing comments about story and stuff, but it kind of is like a magical girl type of scenario, kind of like what you get from something like Sailor Moon or Blue Reflection, where they're kind of normal girls until they transform into the purgatory to like these warriors, and it's really kind of like it's kind of tropey, to be honest. The story is tropey as well. It has a lot of tropes. If you don't like like that, you probably shouldn't be playing JRPGs. But as well as something to mention about this game, it's kind of edgy. The story is very much a darker story than what you get from normal JRPGs, or as I understand at least. It's not lighthearted and upbeat, it's pretty much a downer RPG. So if you're not in the mood or you're kind of sad, I wouldn't recommend playing this game because it's pretty much a downer through and through. I am playing a darker one right now called Death and Request, which will be the next I played video when I beat that one, but that game is darker, but this game is pretty dark anyways. But in terms of stories and characters, I really liked this game for that, and I would say this is the strongest part of the game because it does not suffer from the budget JRPG experience that the rest of this game does. But overall, what were my opinions on Crystar? I really enjoyed this game for what it was, honestly. I have come to kind of be alright with budget JRPGs. I played a decent amount of them, and this is by far not the worst one I've ever played. This is good. Unfortunately, like I said, the budget just holds it back from being great. If it was given more of a budget, honestly, I think this could have been a great game and maybe even pushed past being a great game. I just feel like, unfortunately, with FurYu and NIS, their kind of relationship has been that NIS keeps giving FurYu a limited budget to work with, and FurYu just can't develop these amazing games that they could maybe if they got like a better budget. But at this point, they just keep sitting in the middle with their games just because it feels like they're always held back by a budget. I feel the same way with FurYu as I do Gust, kind of like they could really be a killer like JRPG developer. In this case, it's more if they got more of a budget. They could really become a shining like pillar in the JRPG developer list if they had more of a budget, but unfortunately right now they're just held back by a budget. I would recommend this game. Honestly, it's pretty good. I wouldn't say you have to put it at the top of your list though. This can be pretty far in the backlog and you'd be fine, mainly because the carrying part of this game is the story and characters. If you're intolerant to heavy repetition, would not recommend picking this game up. You might as well just skip on it though. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you. Stay chill.